All right, welcome back. Nate, take it away, sir.
Yeah, Donna, great job on the first half of our session. A lot of pearls in there, right? I mean, stuff that you and I have lived in our careers, and you're living it now with your deals. There's a lot of commonalities, and I'm curious, just from the years you've been in sales, primarily in the technology space, like myself. Looking back, what advice would you give yourself coming out of college, taking your first sales position? Maybe it was the second or third position, whatever. But knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself looking back? If you go back and tell your 22-year-old self, hey, Donna, this is what, don't worry about this or do this different type thing. I'm just curious, like some of the lessons learned that you would tell yourself, because frankly, a lot of our listeners are newer sales execs, right? And they're trying to learn the craft of going maybe from a transactional salesperson to more strategic sales where you're doing $1 million contracts like you are right now today. What would you tell yourself from that standpoint?
Yeah, and those are some really good questions, and I'm very fortunate because we've got kind of a younger team at our organization of BDRs, ISRs, et cetera, as well as previous companies. So I have the ability to kind of interact and talk with a lot of those folks. And I think one of the things that I would tell myself and what I tell them is first and foremost, you know, is this what you like? Is this what you want to do? Because you're all in 100%. I mean, it doesn't matter if you've been in as a salesperson for a year or 30 years. When you really enjoy sales, you enjoy sales, and typically you do very well at it. But I think that it's not necessarily for everybody. So I think that very early on, you need to figure out, is this something that excites you, motivates you, drives you? Nobody else is really going to give you the grit besides yourself. So you've got to wake up every day and want to do things. You've got to wake up every day. And even if you just closed the biggest deal in the company's history the day before, you got to still have your, foot on the gas and look for, okay, what's going to come next. And that's just kind of the mentality of a salesperson. And I think that all of us have been around sales long enough where some people that just they eat, breathe, and live in sales, and that's just something that they really enjoy. And then there's others where it's kind of a means to an end. So I would say figure out early what you really want to do. The other thing that I could say in terms of what's been helpful in my career is I've really enjoyed success being kind of a little bit niche focused. And what I mean by that is I was in the ERP space for many, many years. I was at PeopleSoft, and then we became Oracle, worked at SAP. And even those 12 years that I was at Rimini Street, we were doing third party support and maintenance for Oracle and SAP, so the two largest ERP providers. So I found kind of what I consider to be a niche space. So I would recommend for those that are just coming out of school, those that are figuring out their sales career, find what you feel is going to be exciting for you over the next 20, 30 years. It's not going to be ERP anymore, but maybe it's going to be AI. Maybe it's going to be SaaS. Maybe it's going to be in one of those areas where you have the ability to move to another organization and be valuable immediately because of your past and prior experience. So kind of find that niche that's going to work really well for you. Third, find the organization that's really going to help mentor and grow you and your career. I think one of the things that wasn't out there when I came out of grad school and I initially went into enterprise software sales is you didn't really have all of the ISR, BDR roles. Those are really tough roles. And those are roles that oftentimes you stay in for a year or two and you either get promoted up or you move someplace else with that experience. So again, I think make sure that you find a company where, work to find a mentor within that company or within the community. Be engaged, involve yourself in other activities where, frankly, every day is a sales day for you. You've really got to make sure that people know and understand, who you are, what you're doing, what organization that you're at. And then one of the things that I told recently to another young sales professional was I said, you really should, you know, he came to me and I knew exactly what he was saying. He's just like, I just got promoted and I'm in outside sales now. I did really, really well as an ISR. And I said, and you're scared. And I said, and you're scared working with those sales engineers, with those other people? And he goes, yeah. He goes, that's where I'm at. I said, go in there with confidence. Go in there where you've done your homework. You've done your homework. You set the expectations of the strategy of the deal, what you need from them, what you're going to give them back. I said, it really is, you know, simplicity is the old adage, but you've got to, you've got to have grit. You've got to have the motivation. You've got to have the confidence, but you've got to have the process and the routine. And if you have all of those things, you will be enormously successful. And it doesn't matter what your age is. It matters that you're doing all of the right things the majority of the time with all of the deals and with the individuals that you're working with.
Yeah, that's great advice, Donna, especially in the confidence piece that we've heard that this is, I think, our 8th conversation that Rob and I have had with past colleagues and clients, and that confidence is huge, even on the IT side. And it was interesting because we had an interview with a former CIO client of mine who I think you know as well, and he had mentioned that in his discussion is having the confidence and pretty much everyone we've talked to, that's a big piece. And some of it you don't get until you get your teeth kicked in a few times and you kind of toughen up, lack of a better term, right? And when it comes down to it, the grit you talked about, you got to have it. If you don't have it, you are not going to last in sales. It's just the nature of it. You'll work a big deal, $1 million contract, it's ready to sign, and all of a sudden, someone gets fired, they get acquired, deal goes up in smoke. Okay, move on to the next one. You can't take that stuff personal. And I think that grit that you were talking about is so key. It really, really is.
Yeah, you have to learn, there's only, despite what management says sometimes, there's only so much that we can control. And
Yep.
so control what you can control with preparation, with confidence, by showing leadership skills, and the success will follow. I think one of the biggest things that I learned, and it was in my 30s, but it was probably at the time that I was in PeopleSoft, but I was getting promoted from, I had sold various education services. So training services is kind of how I came into PeopleSoft. I was getting promoted to, being a sales rep on the outside side and selling, PeopleSoft apps, etc. And I remember being scared, but I had some health issues, and it kind of knocked some sense into me. And what it did was say, you know what? Everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. And doesn't matter if it's a CIO, doesn't matter if it's, doesn't really matter who the person is. And so if you've got a product that you're passionate about, if you've got the preparation, and you've got something that really is going to help an organization out, you should feel very confident in terms of talking to that individual. And I think they respect the people that have that confidence, that passion, that conviction that what they have is really going to help them help their organization.
Yeah. And talking about confidence, being able to say no, because you have that, that give a mouse a cookie thing. Judy always says that to me, you're always give a mouse a cookie. I'm like, no, I'm not. She's right. But it's the same with customers, right? You got to say no at a certain point. And like you talked about with your pilots, you kind of time box them. You have the success criteria. You're, controlling the process is a big part of what you do as a sales exec, right? Because you're going to have a lot of things that are totally out of your control. And when you have that deal and kind of being in that tornado, you got to just move heaven and earth to get things done, both internally and with the customer. And one question, back to your deal that you had talked about earlier, I meant to ask this when we were talking about that. At what point did you know you had the deal? Like, were you like, we're going to get this?
Truthfully, I knew from the onset. I knew that it was ours to lose,
Right,
because it truly was ours to lose. I knew that all the factors were there in terms of the volatility of the market, what our solution could do for the organization, the fact that they had looked on and off at our organization for many, many years, although it had been 10 years since we had had an active opportunity with them. But I knew if we executed flawlessly, that we would win that business. But I was just a small piece of that. There
right.
were many, many other folks that were engaged both on the customer side as well as on the background on our organization side. And that was really key. And that was, I think that was kind of the icing on the cake, and something that I even shared at our SKO, our sales kickoff this year with the team, and that was it was truly a team success. And I think those are the best deals to win when everybody really was an important and a key stakeholder in achieving that overall win.
What were the main differences in your approach this time versus 10 years ago?
I wasn't at the organization 10 years ago. I think that there's been a lot of technology improvements over that period of time. And I think it was just that we had and they had the focus and the conviction and just really the macroeconomic climate of what was going on, that this was really the right solution for their organization to evaluate quickly and decide to roll out globally.
Interesting.
That's a good point you bring up, Donna. Sometimes it's a timing thing,
Hmm.
right? Very much so, because it was somewhat of a perfect storm when you engaged them, right? March, April timeframe last year, things were a little bit crazy in the market, which, that volatility we talked about, being able to show that improvement of 20, 25%, that equates to dollars, right? And when you're in a high volume business like they're in, that 20, 25% is huge, right? And as when Rob asked about the ROI for them, I'm not surprised they didn't share it, right?
Yeah.
Of course, they weren't going to share that. So,
Yeah, because
but
in that
it
situation,
was another check mark that this is moving forward, because they saw enough value in just the small pilots that they did, that they knew that this would be valuable for their organization. And we work with a lot of different trading organizations. We work with even a lot of the exchanges. So it's a product that does work very, very well for that industry. And I think that was another reason around the timing, Nate, to your point, as well as Rob, to yours, that enough organizations on the technical side have heard, have seen, have been at different companies and gone from one to another, that they know that this is a really good solution. In fact, when I walked out of that holiday party last year at the company, I met a new person that I hadn't met before. And he's like, oh, he goes, I'm so glad that we're with your organization now. I was with another company that we looked at you, and we went with you with a different one of your products, but he goes, I'm so glad that we have that here now. And so I thought that that was good. And it told me that a lot of these technical folks, they know one another within the trading community, within the financial services arena. And so again, it's just a matter of making sure that you're in there at the right time.
Yeah, and a tip for especially junior salespeople who are just starting out, when you're in a situation like that and you're looking for opportunities to quantify, you may not get it in the moment from that customer or that client, but there's one case, and I won't give you the full long story, but the short version is, I helped one of my clients through a coaching engagement win a deal. And confidentially, one of the guys at the company left the company, and he knew about the deal. He was very familiar with it. He said, Rob, he said, we made more money on that deal than we paid you to fly around the country and coach all 35 of our managers. And so I don't need to know the exact dollars to have a quantifier there that I can leverage from a coaching standpoint. And if you could get anybody from one of those trading firms to give you even a glimpse of what that meant, when you put that sort of efficiency in a high frequency trading environment, I it wouldn't shock me if it made you change your pricing.
We did do that earlier this year, Rob. So that's a really good point.
yeah, and the other thing too, and Donna, you know this, these technical people, the engineers in the financial space, they all know each other, right? They bounce around from company to company. They're buddies. They go, spend off hours, go out, have cocktails, all that stuff. And it's a very, very small network in that world, right? And when you have that solid reputation of the, product did this for ABC company, you're able to tell that story over and over. I'm assuming you're talking to a lot of financial services firms and, working to get in and engage with those folks because they all know each other, right? Whether we
They,
like it
they,
or not.
they do.
And when you do a solid job and you provide the value you're providing, I mean, that's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, it is. And I want to share a story because it's something that I learned from my dad. My dad always said, and he was a superintendent of schools, and he said, every single person is important in a school district. It takes everyone in that school district to run it and to run it successfully, whether you're a cook, a janitor, a teacher, an administrator, it doesn't matter. And he really lived by that. And it was something that I learned very young. And it's something that I've taken into my sales career where maybe I'm a little bit different. You know, if I get an opportunity to talk to a customer, I talk to a customer because they may be at another organization down the road. They may know engineers at another organization. I don't think that there's ever a waste of time in terms of being able to talk to a customer. We may not have the best fit with a particular conversation, but it all boils down to service. It all boils down to, all right, they've learned a little bit more about us. We've learned a little bit more about them. And at some point in time, that is going to pay off.
Yeah, and Donna, you're one of the good ones, so to speak, right? That I've worked with, and it's interesting because you never know. And I learned this at ADP right out of school, and I mentioned I think on another discussion we had like this. You never know where the next meal's coming from, right? That person you could talk to in passing at like your company kickoff, they could go to another company if it's a client. All of a sudden, boom, hey, we work with Azul. This is what we have to do. This is why. This is the value they provided. And then immediately your deal just is short circuited to a very short time frame, right? Because again, you know, those conversations are key. And you may hear something from that customer that you can use with another client that may be in their space, right? So there's a lot of commonality pieces that you have when, you know, within those discussions. One other question I had, Don, is, you know, looking back on your career, is there anything you would have done differently, whether it's, you know, going from one company to another or just anything different you do in your career with kind of the trajectory you had in working in different organizations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that I've been maybe a little bit different in a couple of respects. One is I've stayed at the same companies for a period of time.
Hmm.
I was at Rimini Street for 12 years. I was, you know, between PeopleSoft and Oracle after the acquisition, that was maybe about 8.5 years, a long time for a seller to be at, you know, one particular company. But I don't think I would have changed that. I think that every move was made strategically. Every move was made where I could take some of that experience, those learnings to that next organization. It didn't feel like I was kind of starting over in a different industry or that I couldn't leverage the knowledge and the expertise that I had gained from the previous company. So from that perspective, I don't think I would have changed anything. But I always do kind of look back over time and say, gosh, and I remember our CEO at Rimini Street when I retired from Rimini Street and came out of retirement. But he's just like, Donna, I thought that you'd be, you know, leading the Midwest region. And I think it was a compliment to him where some of the best sales folks did make the leap to management, or some of the sales folks made the leap to management. But I guess for me personally, I've always really enjoyed working directly with the customers. I've enjoyed progressing the sales cycles, closing the sales deals, being a mentor, hopefully, to some of those that are newer to the organization, and the teamwork approach, both internally as well as externally with the organization. So that's kind of what has driven me over the course of time. And just over the last many years, I've just kind of seen sales management, you know, no fault of any organization, because I think they're all kind of similar at this point in time, but sales leadership has become more of a micromanagement of just the pipeline and the forecast and the numbers, and not really being really engaged with those, you know, the customers, the prospects that you're working with. And that I think will always continue to be kind of where I really enjoy working within organizations, is, you know, working with those prospects, working with upselling and cross-selling organizations that we already have. So
Yeah.
hopefully that answers that a little bit, Nate.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned passion earlier. And the other thing I would say is just my read. It seems like you have fun when you're doing this, right? And that's a big part of it. Because if you're not having fun, and when I say fun, sales is very difficult, right? You're going to have tons of challenges, and it's very difficult to pick yourself back up the next day. You may lose a big deal, and all of a sudden next day you got a big meeting with another customer. You can't be ho-hum, right? You got to focus on that particular client, but having fun and having passion for the product you're selling. And when you know the product works and it works very well, that comes through, right? If you're kind of, not sure about a product, and I worked for some companies where it was a rock solid product, but it was very cumbersome to deploy. And if there's a competitor that has an okay product that's quick to deploy, it's big trouble with China as a sales rep, right? You'll get some of your deals, but when people want things quick, let's go. You're sometimes in a tough situation in those. But kudos to you because I know you've got passion for solving customer problems, and that's a big part of what comes through. And I think having fun with what you're doing is a big part of it.
Yeah, I think the fun and the passion, those are two things, and those are probably two things to share with every new salesperson. It's like if you're not going to have fun doing this and you're not passionate about it, there's a lot of other positions within enterprise software companies. There's a lot of other positions that are available out there, but maybe sales isn't quite the right, path for them for the future because at the end of the day, you want to have fun. One of the things that I think is nice about being in sales is that every deal is different. Every customer is different. Every sales cycle is different. And even though you've got all of the knowledge and the experience, and you can kind of, make sure that you're doing your process and your routine, you're going to be learning and growing with every single opportunity. And there'll be frustrations too along the way.
Yep.
There always are. But when you get that deal, it always, I think, kind of supersedes everything else, and you're off to your next one.
Yeah, that's awesome. The passion piece you can't train,
Nope.
right? You either have it or you don't. And one thing I've always tried to do too is when you're working with a customer, you want to I don't want to say be excitable, it's not the right word, but you want to be excited about what you're talking to them about, right? Because clients deal with salespeople every day. A lot of them are ding dongs, right? We've worked with a lot of them, Donna. The ones that kind of come and go and they just don't get the game. Um, but like my mom used to say, don't do anything that you wouldn't tell me or something, right? From a sales transaction or engagement standpoint. But that's a big part of it, right? Having fun and having that passion to solve the customer's problems. And if you do that, if you solve their problems, you'll be successful. It's that simple, right?
Yeah, I agree. And another couple of things too that I'll add to that is just integrity. I think that the best sellers, they have integrity. They have that in spades. And I think that if we treat our customers well, that's a win for the company. It's a win for us. It's a win for the next time we want to work with that customer. It's a great win for the next time we move to another organization. So just always think about integrity and just doing the right thing. And if you do the right thing for the customer, ultimately that's going to be the best thing for your organization and the best thing for you. And then I want to mention just one other thing in terms of with customer service, and that is, I just got back from Italy and we were gone with the family for about 10 days. We did something a little different. We stayed in 3 different cities, we stayed at very small boutique hotels that were locally owned and operated. And what a great experience that was. We worked with all of the, owners, had a chance to talk with them. In fact, the last place that we were at up in the Cinque Terre, it was the grandma and grandpa that owned the hotel. Their son, probably about my age, was the chef, and his son was actually the waiter. And one night they taught us how to make pesto, and then they fed us dinner, and it was just such a neat experience. And you could just see how just they were just so happy that we were happy with that experience. And it really brought it home to me this week in terms of I have to do that same thing with my customers. I have to try to delight them with our customer service. Might not be able to always do everything that they want or they ask for, but if we provide that really, really good customer service to prospects as well as to existing customers, that's at the end of the day, I think what most organizations are looking for.
Yeah, you bring up a great point about integrity because a lot of people hear that and they're like, "Oh yeah, well I'm honest. It's going to come across." And what they don't realize is I spend a lot of time in the training that I do, teaching people and creating awareness around the distance between what they said and what somebody else heard. And there's a huge chasm there sometimes. And financial services is a great example of that because if somebody calls them on their pricing and says, real life story, what CFO of a company contacted one of my clients after an RFP, and he said, you were 20% higher than everybody else, and you came in ninth out of 12 on RFP, and they were only going to go with the top 6. I've been on enough ride-alongs to know that the average salesperson at that moment is going to say something stupid along the lines of, "Well, give us a chance to sharpen our pencils, and we'll get back to you." Now, kudos to this rep. She didn't do that. She protected her pricing and she defended it and positioned why they'd chosen that. But what people don't realize is that when you do say stuff like that, when you say, give us a chance to sharpen our pencils, which is, besides being a horrible cliche that she shouldn't use anyway, it accidentally communicates, you caught us. We knew the price was too high. You caught us, and now give us a chance to make it right. Well, talk about a great way to lose credibility and trust and, authenticity, integrity. It's all out the window in that moment.
Yeah. You will lose every one of those deals.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me of what one of my friends, Chris Bell, would say when somebody says, your price is really expensive. He would say, it is expensive.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then he would talk about obviously why the price is what the price is, but not trying to diminish what they said. Here's why here's why it's expensive in your eyes, but here's why we charge what we charge. So basically providing the value around why the price is the price. And you know me, Don, I despised giving discounts. It physically pained me to give a discount because the value we provided our old shop was so high. And that comes through. If you're not confident about your price, you're going to get squeezed. They're going to smell it. People smell it every day, right? And they know they see it.
100%. And they'll keep asking. And the second that you open up the door, then you've kind of lost any and all negotiation leverage. And again, that goes back to selling value versus price. And at some point in time, when you've put the best package out on the table for the customer and it's the best and it is the best and final, sometimes you have to be willing to walk away, which is the hardest thing ever for a salesperson to do. But at some point in time, you just have to kind of call a timeout and say, all right, the ball's in your court now. We've done everything. We want to earn your business, but the decision is yours.
Yeah. And a much higher percent, we talk about trading. A lot of traders, like the firm that I work for, they made money based on trading things that statistically happen a lot more often, or that happen a lot more often than statistically would be predicted. And one of those things is that when you walk away, an amazing percentage of the time, that customer will come after you, whether it's because they went with somebody and it didn't work or they realized the value or whatever. You're not going to win every deal, but it's interesting. And I don't know that there's any research on that, but I've got to imagine it's probably north of 20%, which is a lot.
Yeah. It's always frightening. It never feels good to be in that situation. But
No.
when you've done everything possible and you're very confident that you've got the right solution, the right approach for that particular customer, obviously there's always other options, including doing nothing or staying with an incumbent, whatever it might be. But you've got to have the conviction, and your leadership has to have the conviction that you've put out the best possible package, and now it really is up to them to decide to move forward.
Well, in the do nothing option, most deals are lost to customers who decided not to do anything. And so, the question, and I will coach people to ask this and say, what is the risk of not doing anything?
Yep.
Because a lot of times they haven't thought of that.
And it's a great question to ask.
The other thing, Donna, that you were talking about, if you don't get to that, this is our best and final, they're going to keep doing that give a mouse a cookie thing, right? And when you've done everything you can to position the value and everything of your solution, at some point, and this we talked about this recently with another guest, you get to a point in a deal where you're quote unquote done selling. And then all of a sudden they go quiet and you're like, oh shit, what do we do now? And you've been there, Donna, many times, just like I have. And you're like, oh man, I feel like I should be doing something. This gets back to that transition timeline thing that we would do, where you have those weekly status calls. Then you have something, hey, we haven't talked for a week. Where are things at? Well, procurement's doing XYZ. And having that control of the timeline is so key, just because you're going to get to that point where you're done doing the selling, and then it just takes on a life of its own behind the scenes to eventually get either closed or not happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And having that touch point within the organization, that you've got somebody now. They may be a little bit net neutral, but you've got somebody that can kind of help you understand where that timeline is, maybe even above and beyond weekly cadences and things like that. I always find that that's really important. I think one of the things that I could do better is just, widening that net. Sometimes we become so focused on just one individual that if something happens with that one individual or their position changes, whatever it might be, then it makes it a little bit, the deal gets stalled.
Yeah,
Yep.
you're not alone in that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All
Well,
right.
Donna, thank you so much for taking time with us today. This is a
You're
great
welcome.
discussion, a lot of pearls with what you shared, and definitely appreciate you making time for this with us.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for tuning in. That's been another version or another edition rather of the Sales Stories with Nate Teske. I'm the co-host Rob Sullivan. Donna Walker, thank you so much for joining us today. And definitely another one. I always say that, feel like I say this every time, but watch it again. There's so much good stuff in here. The whole idea of price versus value, the whole idea of selling more broadly within an organization, really quantifying the value that you bring to the table and understanding what that is. Lots of great nuggets in here, and there are many more to come. So thank you. Click that like and subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. If you got value out of this, please forward it to a friend. Let people know about it. If you know somebody who should be a guest, let us know. And also, if you have questions that you want us to either ask a former guest or ask current guests or future guests, let us know that too. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
thank you.